Eren Yeager has become a speculative enigma in the Attack on Titan community. People don't know what to believe regarding his behaviour. Some still cheer for him because of their familiarity with the character and their deep down belief that Eren is doing all of these horrible things for the right reasons. Others have condemned him and his actions and see him as the final villain of our story. Whatever you think, there has to be a method to his madness, and that's what we're here to discuss today. Eren's positioning in our story has changed. He was once our main character and we saw things as grand as the world changing through his eyes, but since chapter 90, Eren has weirdly stopped being our protagonist. We've consistently since then seen the world of Attack on Titan through the eyes of different characters. We've only gotten a single internal monologue from him since chapter 90, where he speculates and gives exposition about his strategy against the Warhammer Titan. It's purely used as a method of explaining things to the audience, and we don't get any indication of his thought process or why he's doing what he's doing. The point is that Isayama has intentionally left us out of the loop. We have no idea what Eren is actually planning, since we all seem to agree that he isn't going along with Zeke's euthanasia plan. So what is Eren planning? What is his plan to resolve the conflict and end the almighty cycle of hatred? Perhaps he's got a plan. Maybe it's a Yeager master plan, akin to Doran Martell's Dornish master plan that also may or may not exist. So now some of you are a bit confused, and I'm terrified that some viewers aren't going to get all the Presta Jacobs references and misunderstand the opening 10 seconds of the video. So before we delve too deep into the analysis and get to the core of this theory, let me introduce this series and explain a few things. Solving the Problems of Advancing Giants is not only an incredibly clever play on words, but it's also a video series I'm creating, seeking to explain and theorize about the biggest mysteries surrounding Attack on Titan. We can call it SPAG for short. Not really. Today's video is part 1, and at the end of the video I'll preview part 2. This series will cover a variety of topics from and including the Yeager master plan, whether or not Ymir actually exist, and we will attempt to cover or maybe uncover the mysteries surrounding paths. And obviously this will all be done in a very Preston Jacobs-like fashion. So the name of this series is just a title for a variety of theory videos done in the style of YouTuber Preston Jacobs, who's known for his supposed tinfoil takes on A Song of Ice and Fire. That's Game of Thrones for all the illiterate members of the audience. And the title of part 1, the Yeager Master Plan, is also a play off his video series, the Dornish Master Plan, hence the opening 10 seconds of the video that I ripped from one of his videos. Now that we're all caught up, let's talk about Eren.
Trying to get that dick to Kelly Conway. Pull my case, boy, I beat that shit like Lennon beat his bae, Young O'Shea.
Before we delve into Eren Yeager's master plan, we need to establish who Eren is currently and who he is as a character, since it's still quite a divisive issue. Not only that, but we need to establish why Eren is no longer a good guy, and we also need to undercut this entire video by admitting from the beginning that the Yeager master plan will ultimately fail because of this. So firstly, who is Eren Yeager right now? As of chapter 119, we are led to believe that Eren Yeager has betrayed and manipulated the Survey Corps in order to serve as the catalyst for Zeke's euthanasia plan, which has included killing thousands of innocent people, assassinating Zachary by proxy, nearly getting Levi killed and possibly maimed for life, and telling Mikasa that he hates her, and subsequently beating the shit out of Armin. He sounds like a pretty bad guy. But the fandom seems to have come to the conclusion that Eren is playing Zeke and has a grander plan, and that everything he's doing is for some greater good, just like our favourites, Thanos and Griffith. Armin has even speculated on this in recent chapters, explaining that he believes Eren is playing Zeke to activate the Founder so Eren can use it for some alternative, altruistic plan. I would have to agree with this. I severely doubt, though it is possible, that Eren is fully aligned with Zeke's beliefs and thinks euthanasia is the final solution. Obviously this video wouldn't need to exist if I didn't think Eren had a master plan in the works. But even if it was all for the greater good, I still don't think Eren is a moral actor. I think Eren is too far gone to be right, and that's why I think the Yeager master plan will fail. In fiction, there are commonly 3 goals in the creation of a piece. 1, to entertain, 2, to make money, and 3, to pass a core message or theme onto the audience. The typical way of getting this message across to your audience is for the protagonist to realize the theme through his or her journey, and to have them be the role model for the audience to aspire to be like. Eren is not fit to be a role model to the audience anymore, and Isayama using Eren as the main vehicle to portray this message to the audience just wouldn't fly. This messenger can't do as Eren has done, since even now Eren realizes that he is no different from the initial antagonist of this series, the one that caused thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to die. If Eren's master plan were to succeed, Isayama would be proving Eren's actions right and be justifying them, which is something I think is nearly impossible. So the Jaeger master plan can't succeed, no matter how cool or interesting it is. So this leaves us with the issue of, if Eren is not going to be our savior and the hero of the story, who is? We will have to decide on a new character for this, which is something that's not quite relevant to this part of the video, but we will get back to come the end of the video. And spoiler alert, you're not gonna like it. Ultimately, Eren's methods are the reason the Jaeger master plan won't succeed. He may seek to end the cycle of hatred through this plan and finally save humanity as he's been promising since the beginning, but he's going about it the wrong way. He's not fit to carry Isayama's message, but the plan will still be vitally important to the plot and will reveal the mystery surrounding Eren's character, and that's what we're here to discuss and speculate about. Also, if anything about what I'm about to say is true, I want some bragging rights. And now that we've established that this plan doesn't have to have moral fortitude, as long as Eren believes it's for the greater good, let's move into the theorizing stage of this video. The question now becomes, what is the Jaeger master plan? But before we get to my explanation of how the plan has come together and how it works, and what fundamentally it is, I must explain that it's predicated on the 5 following necessary certainties. These are the 5 assumptions that we have to accept if my theory has any levity. Some of them you will probably think are ridiculous, but we will work through them together and justify them slowly. Look at the length of this video, for God's sakes, we've got all the time in the world. So the assumptions are: 1. Eren Yeager is not evil and has a method to his madness. He's doing it all for the greater good. I think this is something I believe we just established, so tick. 2. Eren Yeager is not planning to go along with Zeke Yeager's euthanasia plan. Everyone coming to this video probably already believed this, so tick. 3. The Jaeger master plan will fail. I think I've started to convince you of this before even explaining what the theory itself is, but I'll give a more detailed explanation on how it will fail later in the video, so tick. But as I warned, the following 2 are going to need to be explained further, so don't forget. 4. Eren Yeager made contact with Willy Tybur while in Mali, and Willy Tybur was in on the plan. Number 5. Eren Yeager is in love with Historia Reiss. So let's corroborate these last 2 spicy statements for the more cynical fans in the audience. Let's start with Willy Tybur's cooperation in this plan. I'm going to deep dive every scene involving Willy Tybur and damn near every time he's mentioned to try and convince you that he was in on this plan. Willy had such an impactful role in the plot and was such an interesting enigma that I think more was going on in his 5 or 6 scenes that we ever see him in. We first hear about the Tybur family from Zeke in the private warrior meeting that Reiner figures out isn't very private. Magarth and the superior Malayan officers are listening in on this conversation. Zeke mentions that the Tybur family have suddenly taken an interest in Malayan politics and will serve as Mali's messenger to convince the world that Paradise is the #1 threat to everyone's existence. Everyone is completely unaware that the Tybur family functionally runs Mali at this point, except for Zeke if we run with our theory, because not even Magarth knows at this point. This comes after Zeke floats the idea of reclaiming the founding Titanmen after the war in the High Council meeting with the Malayan general. Zeke is the driving force behind Mali even wanting to invade Paradise, which would seem antithetical to what we know his goals to be. So it's definitely possible that at this point Zeke or Eren have already met with Willy Tybur and have convinced him to join their side. This would explain the Tybur family suddenly becoming interested in Malayan politics when they have kept silent for the last 100 years. Besides this, there is obviously other evidence that Willy is working with Zeke and Eren. Firstly, he knows way too much about Paradise and Eren as a person for someone who should have had limited knowledge. He reveals this information when he has his grandiose speech. He knows all about the rebellion on Paradise and how the founding Titan was stolen from the royal family, and this is all explained in the narrative as something Reiner has told the Malayan intelligence agencies. But the rebellion had happened after Reiner had left, and Willy knows all about it. Plus, Eren seemed to know exactly what Willy was going to say before he'd said it, and was telling Reiner and Falco to listen to everything Willy said, as it fit Eren's agenda that he was forcing onto them. Another indicator that Willy and Eren are working together is the placement of the military officials at the speech and the installation of Magarth as a general, which is the highest ranking position in the Malayan army. Willy tells Magarth to safely tuck the high-ranking Mali officials on the edges in case of an attack. Yet when Eren transforms and goes on a rampage, he immediately knows where they are and kills them. It's literally the first thing he does after eating Willy himself. It's almost like he knew where they were beforehand. Also, the Malayan general at the time has an underrated no-fucks-giving death, where he looks up emotionless as Eren comes crashing down upon him. Everyone around him tries to run away and save themselves from the inevitable, but he just sits there emotionless. It's pretty fucking cool. This opens a spot up nicely for Magarth, a spot Willie had promised him even before the death of the current general at the festival. Now Magarth is definitely not in on the plan, but he is strikingly sympathetic to Eldians and the Eldian cause. This is from his years at the head of the warrior division. He could be an important ally in any possible resolution of this conflict. He's not irrationally going to dismiss Paradisian offers as devil talk or anything like that. Magarth is the only important character besides Kiyomi we ever see interact with Willie Tybur. So let's go over those scenes and look for evidence of possible collusion between Eren and Willie. The first time we see Willie, he has come to the Malayan military headquarters unannounced, conveniently when the leader of headquarters was pulled away on short notice earlier that morning. Willie has come to meet with Magarth, and that's exactly what he does. But before that, when Magarth enters the room housing the entire Tybur family, the Tybur family is shown to have a strikingly tall guard who may or may not be connected to Yelena. She is abnormally large, and I'm sure that's not just aesthetic. There's some sort of connection between her largeness and something else in the story, and perhaps it's her relationship to this guy. The connection doesn't seem as much of a stretch as to call her the Devil of All Earth reincarnated, or Rodriguez's surviving daughter. Magarth and Willie then have their private conversation on the balcony. Willie at first susses out how much Magarth knows and asks him if he's figured out who among his family is the shifter. Willie points out that the Tybur family rarely make appearances and that only a select few high-ranking officials know the identity of the Warhammer Titan. And this is where Magarth points out that the leader of headquarters would have been one of those people to know, but conveniently he's not here right now. Willie changes the subject entirely and starts talking about the statue of Hellos. He says the reason for his trip to come down here was just to admire the great statue. This is another trick. Willie is trying to figure out if Magarth is smart enough to have realized that Hellos never existed. Magarth passes, calling the statue hollow, after Willie endlessly praises it. These two constantly talk in code and never quite say anything out loud, but the clear intention behind this comment is that Magarth knows that Hellos couldn't have possibly been real. Them speaking in code is mainly relevant for their second conversation, but let's finish up with the first. Magarth then plays the sussing out game and correctly guesses that the Tybur family secretly controls Marley from the shadows, but judging from his surprised reaction after Willie confirms this is something Magarth only suspected, but now he has confirmation. Magarth says that if Willie has come here to try and stop the war machine from moving, then he's far too late. Willie says the most important thing, and what I think is the key motivation to why he would sacrifice his own life and the life of his family, when he says that Marley took the path of militarism absent of Tybur control. The Tybur family stood back and let Marley rule Marley, and this was the result. All of Willie's predecessors have just stood back and watched. They watched as the royal family left for paradise, and they have stood back and watched for the last 100 years as everything fell apart. I think Willie's motivation for joining Eren's cause is that he wants to pay back the sins of his family. Instead of sitting back and watching history unfold, he wants to make history. He wants his family to take action, even if that means sacrificing themselves to end this seemingly never-ending conflict. He talks about his self-hatred in his speech, and he talks about the sins of his ancestors in his next scene with Magarth, where he also talks about holding the wheel. Willie possesses a strong self-hatred, and this is key to everyone involved in the Jägermaster plan. Willie hates that his ancestors were inactive and hopes to pay for these sins by participating in the euthanasia plot to end this cycle. This self-hatred and want to change things is another commonality between all the people supposedly fighting for euthanasia. So I believe Willie's core motivation is self-hatred and the want to repay what he sees as his family's shameful debt. But we'll talk about his motivations again later. Let's get back to the conversation. It's also cleverly revealed here that Marley and Eldia are one and the same. Marley, this supposed alternative power, is secretly controlled by an Eldian family, was only allowed to flourish because an Eldian king took pity on them and left. Their ground military on the front lines seems to be made up of largely Eldian soldiers, and their biggest military weapons are Eldian Titan shifters. These nations are one and the same, yet they seem destined to continuously kill each other in war. Willie explains that he's seen the memories of his predecessors and has witnessed the history of his family, which implies that he is the Warhammer Titan, but we know he isn't, so either his sister told him all this, or maybe he's been told some things by Zeke or Eren at this point. See, this is the trickiest part of this entire theory. We have no idea what memories Eren has seen, and since he has the Founding Titan inside him, and we all know that the Founding Titan is the center of all this, Isayama has invented a plot device for himself where Eren could have seen anything possible in existence. Isayama can think of any idea he wants and work it into this plot device. It's nearly as clever as it is devious. So everything in this theory lives and dies by whatever Eren has seen, which is literally any possibility Isayama could come up with. So fuck me, I guess. Willy finishes by saying that both Marley and Eldia have been thrusted into the darkness, and the responsibility for this lies solely with the Taiba family, who have continued to do nothing. Clearly, Willy thinks himself different from all of his predecessors and wants to correct their mistakes. Willy then implies that at this time, Marley needs a real Hello, someone who can save them from this conflict. And while he's not being honest with Magath here and is blatantly dangling heroism and glory in his face while not telling him about the master plan he's serving, I think Willy means this. In the Jägermaster plan, Magath can help them end this conflict and save Marley. He can become a real-life Hellos. So this first meeting served as Willy Taiba's first action as part of the plan. He's met with Eren or Zeke and has his marching orders, and recruiting Magath and positioning him to take over the Malayan military is the first step. It's also important to reiterate that Willy would have been told about the euthanasia plan. This is the plan he's serving. If Eren does have something alternative planned, he's not risking it by telling Willy. Willy could very easily turn around and just tell Zeke, and then the whole plan would be foiled. Willy's role in this plan is to set the stage and gather the world against Paradise, so that Zeke and Eren can flex the rumbling power on the entire world, therefore buying Paradise the time it needs to catch up technologically with the rest of the world. He's also installing Magath as leader and setting up the Malayan officials to be killed off in the attack, so that someone reasonable is in a position of power. We will begin to see the seeds of this plan in action in Willy's next scene. The second time we see Willy, he is again speaking with Magath. This is a conversation that Gabi oversees, which is a far more important factoid than you want to believe. This scene is entirely in code, as I mentioned while analysing the previous scene. Magath and Willy use home in their conversation as an alternative word to Marley. They talk about the home needing renovations and how it was on the brink of collapse throughout this scene. This is clearly referencing Marley. To fully understand this scene and why I think Willy is absolutely in on the plan, we have to go over this scene line by line. Magath first asks how the stage is coming along as it's being constructed right in front of them. This isn't code to the best of my knowledge. It's also important to point out that the tall guy that I mentioned could possibly be tied to Yelena is standing behind Willy at the beginning of this conversation. Willy must trust this person with his life. Also, this shot from behind later in this scene looks just like the iconic shot of Kenny and Yuri from behind overlooking the lake. I'm not entirely sure if this was intentional because I don't know what thematic links to draw here or how to reach a conclusion. Maybe that's something you can figure out in the comments. I wanted to get that out of the way before we properly deep dive into this scene. Willy, in response to Magath's question, says that it's coming along well and that he surprises himself with how good he is at direction. He'll make another comment later on at the feast where he talks about dramatization that will happen the following day at the festival. I think these are both hints that Willy is playing everyone around him, directing them like characters in a play. He then asks Magath about the home expansion, and Magath gives him a little notebook where he's detailed on what I presume are write-ups on all the different Marley commanders. Willy says that he sees and that a large-scale demolition is required, to which Magath responds explaining that it had aged severely. This seems to be a callback to the opening scene of the chapter this scene appears in, chapter 98. At the beginning of the chapter, we see a meeting being held by the higher-ups in the Malayan army. All the warriors are notably invited to this meeting as well, but it seems that Reiner is the only one directly involved since they are discussing the logistics of invading Paradise. Eventually, the meeting breaks down and the Malayan higher-ups dismiss the warriors' ideas, saying it was a mistake to think they'd have anything worth saying. All the warriors look dejected by this, and Magath is shown face-palming without actually face-palming. Here he has identified the problem with the Malayan army, and it's these know-nothings who are stuck in the past and have no idea what they are actually doing. If Magath was in charge, he wouldn't conduct himself anything like these morons, and because of their incompetence, Magath and Millie come to a consensus that they have to go. Willy notably then gives the notebook to his giant bodyguard, who leaves them, likely to start organising them into the danger zones for Eren's eventual rampage. The commanders, that is. This is also the dude that may or may not have connections to Yelena, don't forget. It's also important that he isn't around for the rest of the conversation. Willy then congratulates Magath, explaining that the military is his. Magath then delegates and says that the nation belongs to the people now, and mentions that Willy is still a higher ranking official than himself. But Willy corroborates what Magath said by explaining that he wouldn't classify this country as his, but the people's, and he stresses it belongs to both Marleyans and Eldians. This also serves as a precedent that Magarth can use to take full control of the Marleyan military after Willy's death, after the festival. This was very much intentional by Willy. He knows that he's going to die at the festival, and he is making sure that Magarth knows that he's in charge after something happens. Willy then gives his speech about holding the wheel that I mentioned earlier that I'm going to read verbatim. "I hold the wheel in my hand. I now see why no one in times past has tried to take it. It's too heavy, I'd like to let go if I could, even at this moment. But an age has come where I have no choice but to hold it. It just happened to be me. I am the man whose turn it just happened to be." Now, it's necessary to explain what this speech means to different readers depending on what perspective they are reading from. For a first-time reader, they'd probably interpret this as Willy talking about the trials of being the Warhammer Titan, since to this point the assumption would be that Willy was the shifter from his family. But we know that that wasn't true, it was his sister. On a second reading, a viewer would assume that he's talking about the weight of carrying the entire nation's future on his back. But I think it fits more if you look at it from the perspective of him being in on the plan. He holds the wheel in his hands and sees now why none of his predecessors even tried to make a difference. This goes back to him resenting his forefathers for not taking action, but he admits that it's a heavy burden. He'd like to let it go. We will see Willy struggle with the decision he's made in an upcoming scene, but it's bleeding through here as well. He can't just stoically sacrifice himself and his family. He's nervous about it and wishes he didn't have to make this monumental decision, but an age has come where he has no choice but to hold the wheel, to drive the way of the future out of this darkness. The Tybur family is finally not just watching from the background, but taking charge. It just happened to be him. This is another major indicator that Willy and Eren are on the same wavelength. This is a theme of our story that goes back to Eren not believing he was special. Remember the flashback episode with Shardis and his mother? This statement is Willy embodying what Eren learned from that experience. Neither one of them believed they were destined for this. It just happened to be them in these positions of power and knowledge at this particularly turbulent time. And they have come together so no one ever has to suffer through this cycle again, and they're going to end it. That is the weight of the wheel. After his speech, Willy keeps his head down for the rest of the scene as Magarth talks about the home, or as we know, the Marleyan military. He says it was on the verge of collapse, but there were some posts that were still usable. Magarth is identifying here that Marley still has some assets, and Magarth is saying that according to these still usable poles, mice may have already snuck inside of their home. I think he's talking about Pieck when he mentions posts that were still usable, and he's talking about Zeke when he talks about mice that may have snuck inside, even though we immediately cut to Eren and Falco after this, indicating that they might know about Eren. We know Pieck was always suspicious of Zeke. It can be seen in this panel where she's clearly got her eye on him as far back as the attack on Connie's village. She even admits later with Eren that she could always tell that Zeke was lying with everything he said, besides that one time in Shiganshina. As for why Magarth and Pieck didn't act on these suspicions before the festival, and before Zeke makes his escape, it's probably because they didn't have any proof and taking him down would have been a difficult task. They only had days before the festival as of this moment to act, even if they wanted to. The next time we see Willy is at the banquet where we are first introduced to Kiyomi, and the warrior candidates play waiter for the evening. At this banquet, Willy is demonstrated to have grown up alongside all these wealthy aristocrats from other countries, showing his connections throughout the world and the influence the Tybur family has. This is because before he was head of the Tybur family, the family spent most of their time winning over other countries to unmuddy their opinions on Eldians. That was their grand plan to end the cycle. They wanted to make friends and peace over time. This is exactly what Paradise, but more particularly Armin, always wanted to do before Eren forced their collective hand. Willy seems to again, just like Eren, reject this idea that given time, everyone can come to understand one another. This scene also acts as a neat out with the old and in with the new demonstration for Marley. A dignitary from Marley attempts to welcome all the guests to Marley for the festival, but makes a fool of himself because he doesn't entirely speak the language properly and mixes over some words. Instead, Willy stands up and makes a show of it. He welcomes everybody and they all welcome him since they have been familiar with him for years. He gives another speech because he is a showman after all, and he tells everyone that tomorrow he is going to announce his solution to the problems of this world and ask them to keep their anticipation up for tomorrow's festival. He even talks about how everyone agrees that if only the Titans didn't exist, none of this suffering would have ever happened, which is a core tenet of the euthanasia plan if ever I've heard it. Also, Gabby is around at this banquet, and as we mentioned before, she recognizes Willy as the man that was talking to Magarth near the construction of the stage. This will be important later, keep it in mind. The next time we see Willie is when he meets with Kiyomi while he's stressing out and nervous about his speech. This conversation happens minutes before he is to go on stage. This is a very short scene that seemingly has no purpose unless you look at it from our perspective. If we are to believe that Willie Tybur is in on this plan, the scene becomes far more interesting since we know at this point that Kiyomi is in on the plan. We know that Kiyomi is in on the plan because by this time, not only has she visited Paradise, but she also met with Zeke in private and has been promised all of that profit. But it's also important to point out that if we read this scene in terms of our theory, Kiyomi knows Willie is in on the plan and knows what's going down, but Willie doesn't know she's in on the plan until halfway through this scene. This scene interestingly starts with Willie looking into the mirror for self-encouragement, which parallels a later scene with Eren looking into a mirror for resolve. Kiyomi then enters the tent with 2 bodyguards of her own that dress similarly to Kenny. I don't know if that was supposed to be a parallel or what. And upon seeing her, Willie puts back his friendly diplomatic persona on and is sweating heavily. The pressure is understandably getting to him at this point. He also doesn't recognize who she is when he first sees her, establishing that they have never met before. She's introduced as a member of the Azuma Bito family, and she explains that she doesn't intend to bother him, but that she just wanted to see his face. To which he replies that he's a mess right now because of his supposed stage fright. Then Kiyomi says that he's a brave man, and that her family knows that very well. This is the moment the charade drops, and they both understand that they're on the same side. Kiyomi says she wants to see his face. If Willie isn't in on the plan and Kiyomi is here acting like she isn't in on the plan, what this means is she wants to see the face of the man who is the star of this show, and that's it. That's all this scene is about, but under the assumption that Willie is in on the plan, Kiyomi wants to see the face of the man that is making the master plan possible. She wants to see the face of the brave man who's sacrificing himself for the betterment of the world and to end this cycle of hatred. She wanted to see him before his final performance. And her next line, "You're a brave man, our family knows this fact well," shows us and tells Willie that she knows what he's actually doing and that she is thankful for it. Suddenly, upon realizing this, Willie drops the fake diplomatic act and they share an all-telling look before shaking hands. This has given Willie the determination he needed to finally go through with the plan. He isn't sweating as much now and has calmed himself, and we don't see him again until he's on that stage. Kiyomi then says that she prays that he fulfills his duty without any incident, and Willie responds saying, "Much obliged, Miss Kiyomi." It is Willie's duty to do this, to correct his ancestors' mistakes and give everything to solve this problem. With this belief reaffirmed by Kiyomi here, he's now capable of doing it. Kiyomi then gets out of dodge, knowing exactly what's coming. Willie then takes the stage and gives his impassioned speech explaining how history has been misrepresented to the public and how the Eldian king was the actual person responsible for temporarily ending the conflict between Eldia and the rest of the world. He then explains that Eren Yeager is responsible for the peace ending because now he possesses the founding titan and he is not held to the vow of peace like the royal family. All the original King of the Walls wanted was peace for the world, and now Eren supposedly stands to ruin that peace. Willie says that Eren is the enemy of prosperity in this world. This then brings up an interesting thematic dichotomy throughout the series. King Karl Fritz sought peace, and to get his peace, he took the freedom away from the people and allowed them to live blissfully ignorant. He did this by taking the public's memories, and his successors agreed to keep the peace at the cost of the freedom of the people. The people remained ignorant, and whenever one of them threatened this peace, they were killed, as we saw with the Interior Military Police back in the Uprising arc. They believed what they were doing to be for the best. It was the only way to end the cycle of hatred and to keep the peace. Not just inside of the walls, but throughout the entire world. Hanji is told this in a scene she still thinks about to this day by one of the soldiers she tortures, who warns her that someone always has to play the role of peacekeeper, which Hanji is still wary of becoming. Their philosophy and the philosophy of Karl Fritz was ignorance is bliss, while Eren embodies a very different philosophy. Eren and the scouts back in the Uprising arc, and now Willie in this speech, embody the philosophy that freedom to make my own mistakes was the only thing I ever wished for. They wanted the knowledge and the power to make their own decisions, and now they have it, and look what a clusterfuck they have created. Both of these philosophies have caused death and despair at this point, so it's interesting to look objectively and question which system is better. Should the people be free and self-destructive, or should the people be controlled by the state and live happier lives? Thematically, since the beginning, Eren has always prioritized the idealization of freedom, and now we are seeing that play out. Should they have let the king's peace continue? I guess we can't fully answer that question until we know how all this ends, so let's get back to Willie's speech in the meantime. After he announces that Eren Yeager is the ultimate enemy of the world, the chapter ends, and the next chapter opens with a flashback discussion between Willie and Magarth. Willie is told by Magarth that if he takes the stage, it's likely that he'll be killed and that Magarth won't be able to protect him. But of course we know Willie is counting on the actualization of Magarth's words. This is also when Willie tells Magarth to place all the high-ranking Marleyan officials on the edges for protection, which, as we've gone over previously, is the first place Eren rampages on after killing Willie, indicating that he knew where they were going to be because Willie and he had planned them to be there beforehand. Willie has now established to Magarth that for him to get everyone in the world to turn against Paradise, not only he but countless innocent people and some important foreign dignitaries have to die too. This will give Marley and the rest of the world a justifiable cause for war. Magarth reluctantly agrees to this plan and they both shake hands as Magarth admits that the two of them are the real devils of this world, not the Eldians. But as we know, Willie is getting everyone on Marley's side against Paradis because that's what Zeke and Eren desire, in order to demonstrate the rumbling and such, remember? This scene also cements that Magarth is positioned to take charge of the military following Willie's death. Willie's goal and Eren's goal of making Magarth the Marleyan general has been a successful one, and now someone who sympathizes with Eldians has absolute military power over Marley. This will definitely be helpful in the resolution of the conflict if something goes wrong with the initial plan. Also, this keeps Magarth in a position to not interfere with Eren when he transforms, and since he's positioned so far away from the stage, there's no risk of him accidentally getting killed. Magarth is now the general and Willie has set up a stage where everyone will be forced to take action against Paradis, which is exactly what Zeke and Eren want. Willie has fulfilled his role and assisted them in their plan like no one else could. We then cut back to Willie's speech where he continues to slowly get to the point. He demeans his ancestors and calls the Taiba family cowardly for profiteering of unfounded glory, while the rest of the Eldians suffered. This is where he starts with the self-hatred that I think is at the core of his motivation in joining the Jägermaster plan. The euthanasia plan, down to its core, is founded on self-hatred, and I think Willie is being honest with everyone later when he talks about hating his own blood more than anyone else. This is his reparation to try and end this conflict, to ask for forgiveness by sacrificing himself to save the world. Next, he says some things that contextually also fit behind the philosophy of the euthanasia plan. So again, he's indirectly being honest when he says things like he's parting way with his family's false glory, and that he understands how dangerous the world has become. Both these statements are also true assuming that he's in on the plan. He then has an internal monologue, one of his only, where he looks over at his father and his sister, and the tall boy is there too, and he pleads with them to stand there and watch because this is his way of taking responsibility for sacrificing them all. Again, this fits under the context of euthanasia being the solution, and them having to die for their ancestors' sins to eventually save the world. He then introduces the possibility of the rumbling on the world stage and how it would effectively be the end of the world. But then he gets back to more Eldian self-hatred where he explains that all of this danger calls back to the existence of Eldians and that he would have chosen to have never been born if he was given the chance. I've hated my blood more than anyone else. I wished for the extinction of all Eldians. And again, all this contextually fits with Willie thinking that the euthanasia plan could be the ultimate solution. And wouldn't you know, the panel underneath the panel of him wishing for the extinction of all Eldians is a shot of Zeke, who we haven't seen for chapters at this point, which could be some neat foreshadowing. Willie then gives a solution to the people of the world that doesn't actually address the problem he brought up. He says he wished for the extinction of all Eldians, but he says the solution is to attack Paradise together. Even if the world did unify and decimate Paradise, Eldians would still exist, as would this problem and the cycle of hatred. But if Willie isn't on the plan, then this very speech and all of his actions serve this purpose of saving the world from the Eldian race. He then gives his final speech and gives his call to action with tears in his eyes as he realizes that his job is done and that it's time to die. Eren also has a moment where he realizes it's time to act and kill his ally and has a moment of reflection. Then it happens. Chapter 100 closes on Eren killing Willie Taiba, and now the plan is fully in motion. Before we move on from Willie Taiba, now that I hopefully have convinced you that he may have been in on this plan, I think it's imperative to point out that Miss Taiba, his sister and holder of the Warhammer Titan, was not in on the plan. She has an internal monologue to the contrary and clearly doesn't willingly hand the Warhammer Titan over to Eren. She even tries to pull an Annie and crystallize herself, making herself invulnerable to being eaten. Eventually Eren does get the Warhammer Titan and now has all the necessary tools for his plan, whatever that may be. Patience, people. We will get to it soon. During Willie's meeting with either Eren or Zeke, he must have not trusted his sister to go along with this plan if she had been told about it, and so they would have to find a way to defeat her following his death. With that being said, I think I've justified assumption 4 of my theory. Tick. Now that hopefully I've substantiated Willie Tybur's involvement in the plan, let's move on to the possibly even more spicy statement. Eren Yeager loves Historia Reiss. Now we are going to try and talk about this without talking about the hilarious I've always hated you Mikasa scene, because we are going to deep dive that scene later on. Just keep in mind that that scene corroborates everything I'm about to say. To further substantiate this claim, we need to first explain a few things. Firstly, we need to outline Attack on Titan's intentionally asexual presentation until now, Eren's relationship with Historia throughout the series, whether or not Historia loves Eren back, and then give an explanation as to why Eren would choose Historia over any other suitor. Namely, of course, Mikasa. Let's go through it step by step. Attack on Titan has intentionally been asexual in its presentation since the very beginning. Now, idiots, don't freak out in the comments section or on Twitter about me using the F word for a second, but Attack on Titan has deep feministic messaging, and this is tied into its abject asexualization. Female characters are never sexualized in Attack on Titan, there's no fan service moments, and there's no bath episodes. The army allows both male and female applicants, and sexism in the military is never even brought up. Along with that, no one questions Historia being queen or Hanji being the leader of the scouts simply because they're female. Hanji may be the only female soldier in any serious position of power, but you can't win all battles. Besides this, the military uniforms for the soldiers are all gender neutral, and largely the female characters aren't absurdly underwritten like in other manga. Historia, Annie, Mikasa, Hanji, and Pieck are all common placeholders in people's favourites list, and Gabi is in the favourites list of the classier Attack on Titan fan, but Sasha isn't, cause she's dead, but the fact of the matter is that Attack on Titan handles women pretty well. That's the feministic angle, but this also plays into the intentionally asexual angle as well. This lack of sexualization in the female characters means that there aren't any comedic one-liners about Annie's ass. Oh wait. But the point stands that this asexualization is definitely intentional because Isayama didn't want to have sex be a major factor in his story. Even less than sex, characters nearly never grow to even like each other in a romantic fashion. The only couple we've ever seen develop was Historia and Yumiya, and not only was that uncharacteristically progressive and lesbian, but we also never saw them kiss or tell each other they loved each other, it was all implied. In fact, I don't think we have ever even seen a kiss in Attack on Titan. And there were ample opportunities. You're telling me that these teenagers that train all day to fight Titans together aren't sleeping with each other on the down low? These idiots should be breeding like rabbits, yet we never even get an implication of any sexual activity. Even when it's brought up that Levi's mother worked as a prostitute, nothing sexual is derived from it. Kenny isn't even disgusted by it. It's clearly something that Isayama didn't want to write about, which is his prerogative, even if it breaks the immersion when you think about how extremely asexual everything is. Yet despite this, the fandom, as fandoms are known to do, have never been dissuaded to ship character pairings. Mikasa and Eren have always been the main one, and Annie and Armin are always a popular one as well. But after the anime for Season 3 Part 1 aired, the Historia and Eren ship exploded in popularity. And now Historia is pregnant, and it's not entirely evident who the father is. And suddenly Attack on Titan can't ignore its sexuality anymore. Suddenly one of our main girls is pregnant, and someone's responsible. As much as I love the idea of Historia taking power into her own hands and picking a suitor for herself that has personal importance to herself, like some random farmer dude that she used to know, sadly I don't think this is true. I think I have to acquiesce to the popular opinion of the fandom on this one. Eren is probably the father. Again, I prefer the idea that she made someone that made her happy and she's out there living her life with her new family. It's just not likely. And in the limited screen time she has gotten since she agreed to have the child, she hasn't exactly looked happy. Besides my preference for the father of Historia's children, we just have no evidence that this random farmhand is the father. The idea is force brought up by Niall and his friends from the military police in this conversation. And they aren't exactly a reliable source of information, they don't understand anything that's going on at this point, and they're literally unknowingly sipping on Zeke's spinal fluid while they have this conversation. Besides that, we don't actually transition into a flashback of Historia approaching this guy, we just see fragments as these military policemen talk about it, so there's not really any proof. Now this could be Isayama's way of conveniently keeping his asexual presentation intact by having the conception of the baby be unimportant and unrelated to any of our main characters, but I don't think so. Even in the flashes that we do get, Historia's reluctance to go along with this plan is clear. This doesn't exactly look like something she's ecstatic about doing, but we will delve into the darker possibilities of this theory in a second. But the military policemen reason that the timing of Historia's pregnancy was impeccably timed for the betterment of Zeke's survival. The Paradisian army cannot harm Zeke or feed him to anyone anytime soon, because the inheritor of the Beast Titan has to be of royal blood, for Paradise to be able to use the rumbling. And besides Historia and her unborn child, we have no other available royal blood hanging around. After that, they reason that someone must have influenced her to make the decision to get pregnant at this convenient time, someone that needs Zeke to be alive. We even get this cool silhouette of this supposed influencer. And I think I've already spoiled who I think this is from the overview of this section of the video. It's obviously Eren. Eren's entire motivation for attacking Marley before anyone was conceivably ready, and the entire motivation behind the Jägermaster plan, is to protect Historia. We know this because of the Kiyomi scene where she meets with the Paradisian ambassadors. During this meeting, she is acting as an intermediary between Zeke and Paradise, and she outlines the parameters of Zeke's secret plan to save the world that we now know as the euthanasia plot. Eren, in the meeting where Historia offers to meet these criteria and birth children for this plan, stands up and makes it clear that to him, Historia's safety and happiness is more important than saving the world. It's not that much of a stretch to draw the conclusion that maybe Eren loves Historia and wants to be the father of her children, and this as well as her happiness are roped into his speech here about rejecting any plan that would put her in any discomfort. Eren has to keep the fact that he is the father of her child away from the military because they would see that as a conflict of interest, since if Historia gets attached to him, them feeding him to another person wouldn't fly, and we know exactly was planning to do exactly that. But more than that, it's impossible to say what everyone else's reaction to that would be. More importantly, and I stress that this isn't a joke, there's no telling what Mikasa would do if she found out. She's gotten quite triggered when Eren and Historia have had their tender moments in the past, and it's always been played off as a joke up until this point. But if she were to act upon her jealousy of Historia carrying Eren's child, that joke may become foreshadowing in the darkest way possible. But we'll get back to Eren and Mikasa later. So what I think happened is Eren convinced Historia that she had to get pregnant quickly to save Zeke. Maybe he told her about his plan, maybe he told her about the euthanasia plan like he told Willy, but it's not important. And after that, they approached the farmhand to cover as the child's father while Eren actually impregnated her. The farmhand now lives with Historia as part of the cover, and he is also serving as her protector while she's hiding from the madness going on inside the walls. But my claim is not only that Eren impregnated her to protect her, I'm claiming that he's in love with her and may have just used the situation as an excuse to get it in. Now we get into two questions. Why does Eren love Historia, and why would Eren choose Historia over Mikasa or any other girl? The only other possibility besides these two that we've ever gotten any indication of is Annie. So let's tackle the second question first. Why did Eren choose Historia over Mikasa or Annie? Isayama has definitely teased the Annie and Eren relationship before. Annie weirdly teaches Eren how to fight while they were in the cadets together, something that may seem counterproductive to her mission, but we'll talk about that on another day. Also, infamously in a scene that was cut from the anime, they have this cute interaction where it looks like Annie is blushing about Eren wanting to hang out with her more often so she can teach him how to fight better. Eren's potential feelings for Annie are teased when Mikasa questions why Eren can't transform to fight Annie, and she brings up that maybe it's because he has feelings for her. The teasers are there for their potential relationship, but they obviously aren't as fleshed out as the other two candidates. But there are two other reasons why this relationship almost certainly isn't panning out, and they both have to do with Armin. Number one, there's far more evidence pointing towards Armin and Annie ending up together, and Eren in the I've always hated you Mikasa scene that we're still trying to avoid at this point. In that scene, Eren makes it quite obvious that he views Annie as a traitor who fought for their enemy. He seems more set in his belief of believing that the warriors are his enemies now more than ever, so Annie is out of the question. Now what does Historia have over Mikasa? These are the two main girls of this conversation, and to put it simply, Historia nearly has everything over Mikasa. Historia and Eren have always been quite close. What I mean by this is that after Historia stopped being Krista, she and Eren became close. They have a lot in common, and this plays out most notably in this scene from the beginning of the Uprising arc. They both connect over having dreams that they wake up from and don't remember, which in both cases aren't actually dreams but memories that have been fucked with. Historia talks about having trouble knowing who she is now that she's no longer acting like Krista and now that Ymir is gone. And Eren has the stereotypical, unintentional anime romance line, "No, I totally understand." Historia also later in this scene says that Eren must be disappointed that Historia isn't as caring or as helpful as Krista was. But he then says that he never really liked the Krista character and that he always thought that she was faking her nicety. And then goes even further to say that there's something about the real her that he actually likes, and she blushes a little bit. It's not a shotgun piece of evidence, but this scene is definitely laying the groundwork for these two characters to get closer, which is what happens throughout the Uprising arc, where they spend nearly the entirety of the arc together playing off each other. An arc that is far longer in the manga, I might add. Compare this to Mikasa, where the only indication that Eren cares about her at all is the scene where she confesses her feelings to him and he doesn't kiss her. I made this point before in other videos and people seem to have not liked it, but Eren and Mikasa don't have a relationship. They never talk about anything, they never have anything interesting to say to one another, they don't even have any good scenes together. They are just shown together every so often. Whenever there's a scene with our original trio, Eren and Armin are the ones doing the talking, while Mikasa just lurks next to them and virtually says nothing. The only thing she ever says is something related to protecting Eren or annoyingly reminding him to be careful. She's always lurking and getting involved when he clearly doesn't want her to. He literally headbutts her one time for doing this. She acts like his mother. Is Eren interested in a mother who follows him around saying nothing and doing nothing that doesn't involve protecting him or looking after him? Or does he want the hot independent queen who yells at him to stop being a pussy and to stop feeling sorry for himself? The one that encourages himself to be better, or the one that wants him to stay inside because it's dangerous outside? Eren doesn't even understand the importance of Mikasa's scarf. The scarf is her symbolic representation of her love for him and their connection, and after he wakes up from fighting Annie, he sees her cuddling with it while she's sleeping, and he wakes her up to tell her to throw it out and that he'll buy her a new one. I'm not making this up. They don't understand each other, and Eren has never had a cute moment of non-platonic love with Mikasa. Name one great Mikasa and Eren scene where Eren shows any interest in Mikasa besides the scene where he chooses not to kiss her. You can't. Historia is her own person who fought for herself and has goals that don't exclusively involve Eren like Mikasa. And that's why Eren would choose Historia over Mikasa every time. But fear not, Mikasa fans, she will end up with someone that loves her because she'll definitely end up with Jon. They've been teasing it from the start, and I can see Mikasa, after this all is over, if she's still alive and Eren is no longer an option, leaving her scarf behind permanently and opting to join Kiyomi and head to her ancestors' homeland, taking Jon with her. This would be a fitting ending to both of their character arcs in my opinion, and it's far more interesting that Eren ends up with Historia and Jean, who is Eren's initial rival, ends up with Mikasa, showing that also Mikasa has grown as a person as well. It'll be like the second Rei getting over Gendo through Shinji. I'm sure it'll be cute. Just not this cute, because Rei is way better than Mikasa, but back to the point at hand. So now that I've hopefully substantiated the Eren side of this relationship, let's talk about the Historia side. Firstly, we need to ask the question to whether or not it's possible for Historia to love Eren back in that way. Basically, is Historia bisexual? Because until now I've always assumed that she was entirely lesbian and I thought that was cool, but now we have to ask the question because clearly this can't happen unless a male is involved. And the answer to that question is something we couldn't possibly know until it's outrightly stated, which it may never be. And really, whether Historia loves Eren and wished him to be her mate is entirely predicated on this. If she just flat out isn't attracted to dudes, then she can't love Eren back, but if she can, then it's entirely possible. Eren's pretty hot from what I hear. There's this moment while the Paradisian forces are waiting outside for their meeting with Kiyomi where Historia teases Mikasa, asking her why only Eren has seen the mark on her arm. This interaction makes both Historia and Mikasa blush. Clearly, at this point in time, Eren has not told Historia that he loves her, because Historia is basically shipping Eren and Mikasa in this scene. She even comments on her own happiness in this scene by claiming that she is in such a great mood because she's happy. Eren, instead of looking at Mikasa longingly after this scene, stares at Historia in this panel where Hanji noticeably is watching Eren, and then later in the meeting when Historia agrees to Zeke's proposal and then Eren intervenes, denying the request, Hanji is shown glaring at Eren. I think Hanji has figured out Eren's affinity towards Historia, and this will be important down the road in the series. I think it's also important to reiterate that Eren prioritizes Historia's safety over the plan that is supposed to save the world. That's how much he cares about her. Yet she still ends up getting pregnant, meaning that Eren couldn't find another way. He needed her to be pregnant. The happiness Historia displayed in the scene where she's having fun with her friends is absent from everything we have seen from her since. She looks miserable right now. But then again, love isn't a necessary ingredient for pregnancy. Historia looks miserable in the only panel we have seen of her being pregnant. She doesn't look happy, and from what our farmland friend is saying in this panel, she doesn't seem to be taking the best care of herself. She's supposed to be in hiding when this panel takes place, yet she carelessly and emotionlessly is sitting outside in the open where she very easily could be spotted. Also, as we have mentioned previously, in the fragmentary images we are shown of her supposedly asking the same farmhand to impregnate her, she also looks miserable. Now, there are two possibilities here. Either she is just upset because she's being forced to, by her own circumstance, carry a child that she didn't plan on having since she agreed to this for the betterment of her kingdom. It's a shitty circumstance and it's understandable that she isn't enthusiastic about life right now. Either that or something far more sinister has taken place in terms of how she got pregnant. Now, that last statement sounds like it could be implying rape as a factor here, which I will be discussing in a minute. But first, this could just be something she views as her duty. Just like it was Willie's duty for the world for him to sacrifice himself and his family, it's Historia's duty to have sex with someone she isn't attracted to and has no sexual feelings towards to serve the plan as well. Plus, she's also got to deal with being pregnant for 9 months in a heavily stressful period of time while she's in hiding. Her overall depressed demeanor could be because of these various factors, and if I have to put my money on whether this or the other darker option is true, I'd say this one is more likely. But the rape element is possible, and I understand why people would be angry at just the thought of it, especially when I'm implicating their once favourite main character as the rapist. The important thing to remember here is that I more believe the other possibility because again, Isayama has been incredibly asexual with his presentation, and suddenly jumping into a rape storyline would be him jumping into the deepest and darkest deep end imaginable. Plus, as immoral as Eren has become, I don't think he's gone fully Griffith yet, but there is some circumstantial evidence for it. Historia under this assumption is miserable because Eren tricked her into covering up her pregnancy with a farmhand only to force himself upon her. Now, the incredibly important question behind this scenario becomes, why would Eren ever rape Historia? And this might be the most fucked up sentence I'll ever write in my entire life, but Eren might have raped Historia to protect her and because he loves her. If Eren approached her telling her that a pregnancy was the only way to avoid Zeke getting eaten and to avoid his master plan from getting undermined, in the name of the greater good and to protect her from becoming the Beast Titans, since she'd be the only person that could have eaten Zeke at that point, could he have justified raping her? He killed thousands of innocent people, most of them innocent, some of them children. Is it completely off the table for Eren's character to have done this? It's definitely a possibility that I've thought about, but then again, I'm not even sold on this idea. I just think it's a possibility that's worthy of a mention. The other piece of supporting evidence for this is how cynical and angry and regretful Eren has been acting since he arrived back on Paradise. This could all be attributed to the acts Eren had to commit to get his master plan moving. He's regretful, angry and cynical because of the things he's been forced to do to save the world. This supporting evidence comes from the scene with Hanji where she questions him about his actions while Eren is under arrest. After Hanji brings up Eren's actions at the meeting with Kiyomi and asks him what happened to finding another way, Eren freaks out in response to this question. He screams at Hanji, asking her if she could possibly think of another way. He wants her to tell him if there's another way, but she doesn't have an answer for him. It's clear Eren has thought of every possibility but couldn't think of an alternative, and had to go back on his promise of protecting Historia's happiness, which we've demonstrated has been taken from her. This is potentially why Eren needed to go to Mali to meet with Zeke and William to try and uncover some hidden truth that would give him another option, but he couldn't find one, and therefore Historia is pregnant. Eren releases all this frustration on Hanji in this panel, and he has quite a violent reaction, which is quite out of character for post-time skip Eren, who's nearly always calm except for this exact moment when Hanji asks him about Historia. Now again, I would like to reiterate that I believe Historia is seemingly miserable for the first reason. She views this as her duty to the nation and is unhappy that the duty involves carrying a child she doesn't necessarily want. I'm just laying out the evidence for this other possibility so I can possibly get some theory points if it turns out to be true. So to ultimately wrap up this entire part, Eren almost definitely loves Historia since he has demonstrated that she has priority over Zeke's plan to save the world. But Historia's opinion of Eren is unknown, and more importantly, Eren couldn't find another way to save the world without buying time through Historia's pregnancy. So Eren loves Historia, and Historia doesn't necessarily love Eren and is currently miserable for some reason. Assumption 5 has been substantiated, I think. Tick. So finally, let's put all our cards on the table now. What is the Jaeger master plan? We have spent an absorbent amount of time outlining the assumptions that needed to be made for this theory to be true. So this theory better be worth it. What is Eren planning? How can he justify everything he's done? What is this greater good he's done all this to accomplish? What needed all 5 of these assumptions to be true? Well, I apologize, sweet viewers. I have lied to you. There were never 5 assumptions to this theory. There were only 4. meaning that one of these assumptions is fake. But which one of these 5 assumptions was false? I spent all this time justifying points 4 and 5, so they have to be true, or should I call them points 3 and 4 now? So which of these first 3 isn't correct? I spent this video also establishing that there's clearly a method to Eren's madness. So the first one is also true. So is it point 2 or point 3 that I lied to you about? What exactly is the Jaeger Master Plan? Well, boys and girls, the Jaeger Master Plan is euthanasia.
The comedy of man starts like this.
And that's why the Jaeger Master Plan will fail. Point 3 is correct and point 2 was the one I lied about. I believe that at the current point of time, contemporaneously, Eren is fully devoted to the euthanasia plan. Ultimately, all this evidence leads me to believe that the Jaeger Master Plan is euthanasia, Eren is fully devoted to this plan, and that the Jaeger Master Plan will fail. So let's get to it, shall we? Shall we finally get to the reveal of who the person is that will save the world and undermine the Jaeger Master Plan? Let's get into how the Jaeger Master Plan will be foiled and who will do it. So we've now established why the Jaeger Master Plan will fail, but how? Who will undermine the plan? Who will undermine the plan and actually be the one to carry out Isayama's message? Which character have I been teasing as our savior for the entire video? As much as some of you are not going to like it, the only candidate is Gabi. Gabi has been in the right place at the right time too many times, and she'll be the one to demonstrate and enact Isayama's message upon the series and the audience. Now I know that some of the dumber members of the audience are seething right now, even more so now that I've called them dumb, but don't act like this hasn't been obvious since her introduction in Chapter 91. Gabi has been acquiring little bits of information and has been bettering herself since she decided to seek revenge by swinging aboard the Paradisian airship. Gabi is the character who has the best grasp on the entire picture of the Attack on Titan world. She has walked in the most shoes and knows the most secrets. Out of all of the characters in Attack on Titan, she's experienced the most varied perspectives. From the oppressed class of Marley to the farmers of Paradis. She's seen them all. Let me explain this in greater detail as we look back on her journey so far. Gabi grew up in an internment camp in Mali and is aware of the oppression that's faced by the Eldian people there. She has also observed the way that Malayan culture works as she has been granted the title of an honorary Malayan. She has met and cared about people from both sides of Malayan society. She has comrades like the 2 nameless reoccurring guard dudes and Magarth, who are full-blooded Malayans that she actually cares about. She is mortified when the guards are gunned down at random by some scouts flying overhead, and her reunion with Magarth in Chapter 118 might be the cutest thing I've ever seen. She understands better than anyone what Eren's attack did to devastate the people of Mali, and so she understands the Malayan side better than anyone and why they'd want revenge on Eren for what he's done. She also obviously has a family that live in the internment zone that she cares about, and she probably has friends and neighbours that she was brought up with. She might even have a boyfriend who cares about her. She has friends that were killed by Eren's rampage that were only children like her. So she has sympathy and cares about the oppressed Eldian class in Mali as well. Just through her childhood and her training, she understands the Malayan perspective on both sides. And afterwards, when she is captured and taken to Paradis, she learns about the Paradisian way of life, even if she's quite stubborn at first after everything they had taken from her. As she enters the Paradis side of things, she also starts to get lots of useful contextual information. She sees the way everyone reacts when she kills Sasha, showing the different people on the other side. She sees Floch wanting to kill her in revenge, and she sees John deny him and explain that it's not going to bring Sasha back. She's then made aware of Zeke's treachery earlier than most others on her side, and she knows that there must be some justifiable reason for him to jump sides. She's also now seen the faces of many, if not all, of the important military figures on the other side. This cycle of her picking up little pieces of information that are important to the overall picture will eventually be important to the plot later on, and it obviously changes her as a character. When they get out of prison, they run into Sasha's family, namely Kaya, who is nice to them despite overhearing that they might be from Mali. Gabi sees the kindness from Sasha's family here as well, as her and Falco are taken in and cared for. She learns the complexity of the geopolitics of the world when she and Kaya argue about her mother's death. Gabi slowly begins to realize that these supposed devils are just normal people, as she slowly begins to realize that they're eating at the table of the family of the soldier that they killed unnecessarily. She is also collecting more information as she is exposed to Paradisian culture and learning how their society functions. When they visit Niccolo's restaurant, Gabi is made aware that integrated Malayan and Eldian culture can succeed. The restaurant itself is evidence of that. She's then made aware of a potential loving relationship between Niccolo and Sasha, which demonstrates to her again that Malayans and Eldians can be compatible. She rejects these things at the time, but they nest in her brain and slowly transform her. We are watching her evolve into a character and a person worthy of carrying Isayama's message. We are watching a character slowly build themselves up into a better person instead of watching a character denigrate down slowly into a worse person, like with Eren. Later, when Niccolo wants to kill her in revenge, she is saved by the father of the woman she killed, who realizes that revenge killing is endless and that it only repeats the cycle, letting Gabi see the flaw in her logic for avenging the attack on Marley by killing Sasha. She sees the compassion in the people of Paradise, but she also sees that they are exactly like the people of Marley, and just like herself when Kaya sprints into action just like Gabi did and tries to kill her. Mikasa protects her and Gabi is forced to watch silently as Kaya swears to kill her. She's forced to watch this reflection of herself from only about a week ago rage at her, and she realizes the barbarism and the madness of her actions. She later asks Mikasa and Armin why they saved her, and is shocked when they tell her that they hold no ill will towards her for killing Sasha. Her worldview is on the verge of collapse, and for the next few chapters she doesn't say much and just watches things develop around her as she thinks about everything she's seen. She then watches the scene we talked about earlier play out with Eren, Mikasa and Armin. She learns all the information that Eren exposits here, while also learning about how complex the different factions inside the walls are, giving her more of an understanding of the greater picture and showing her how different individual people on the island are from one another. They aren't a monolith of devils like she once believed. She also sees the man responsible for all of her hate break down and beat up his once best friend. She's getting more and more informed about the complexity of this situation. She's then taken with them to Shiganshina, where we see her next reflecting in a cell about Sasha's family, trying to convince herself that they are devils and that the sympathy she feels for them can't possibly be real. Pieck then comes in to rescue her and then fakes a betrayal act to trick Eren into going onto the roof. But in her act, she gives another perspective that Gabi has to think about. Pieck talks about Eldians having no future if Marley is to get their hands on the founding titan. She then asks Gabi the question if both of them are Malayans or Eldians, and Gabi says that they're honorary Malayans, and Pieck says that they are just subjects of Ymir, and that's an inescapable fact for them. She also says that eventually when Marley has no use for Eldians, they will slaughter them all. The Eldians will never be free under Malayan rule. Even though Pieck is putting on an act here, what she is saying is somewhat true, and Gabi does think about it, and she questions her about it in the next scene after learning that it was all a ruse. After Pieck suddenly tricks Eren, her and Gabi escape and they briefly talk about everything. Pieck says that she'd never betray her friends, and that she's never fought for Eldia or Marley, that she just trusts in the people that she's fought alongside with over the years. Gabi now knows even more information and will think about Pieck's motivation to fight just to fight for the people that she cares about. Pieck then takes Gabi to Magarth where they have their touching reunion I talked about earlier, and for the first time she uses some of that information she's been collecting. She figures out that Zeke has royal blood and tells Magarth about it, and that's why the Malayan forces know to stop Zeke and Eren from coming into contact. Her and Colt then head off to try and save Falco. She's also informed that Magarth is the general now in this scene, which is even more information. While they're heading to Falco, Gabi is made aware of the anti-Titan rifle that she'll put to good use in a chapter or two. Her and Colt talk, and then Gabi admits her faults and says that she selfishly ran forward and put Falco in this much trouble, so it's her responsibility to help him get out of this situation. Gabi then shows her development by trusting in Nile to hand Falco over peacefully, something Colt comments on the strangeness of. This shows even more development. She now trusts the goodness in certain Eldians on Paradise. They aren't all devils in her eyes. Colt and Falco reunite as Gabi watches, and they overhear Niccolo escorting Sasha's family out of the danger zone, so they all run and hide. Gabi overhears the conversation as the parents worry about both Gabi and Falco's safety. They blush as Sasha's father says not to worry about them because they're strong, and Gabi nearly cries hearing this. But then they overhear Kaya saying that she'll never forgive them and that she wants to kill them, reinforcing that Gabi has made the cycle continue in her own right, and now she finally understands that and what a horrible thing it is. This prompts Gabi to finally admit that there were no devils on this island, there were just people. She admits that she finally understands Reiner's feelings now since he had this realization years ago. She says that she's regretful for what she did on the airship and apologizes to Falco for causing so much trouble. Falco then gets his various confessions out of the way, including telling Gabi that he wants to marry her. This makes both of them blush awkwardly. Gabi symbolically rips Falco's armband off just as he had done when they arrived on the island, finally putting her ignorant past behind her. This eclectic journey is a story of a person worthy of carrying Isayama's ultimate message. Someone who overcame bigotry and ignorance through her experience, someone who bettered themselves as we watched them grow. And if you've misunderstood this character in this story to the point where you're still mad about Sasha's death or the fact that she tried to save the world by decapitating Eren, you've missed the entire point and have wasted your time on this series. We have seen Gabi grow at every point in this story since chapter 91, and now she's ready to attack the world from the right perspective, and she's going to save it by convincing Eren. I talked about this earlier, but it's going to be a talk no jutsu situation that saves the world. Gabi will have to use all the information she's gathered from all the perspectives she's viewed the world from to make a better argument than Armin did to convince Eren. Ultimately, she's going to argue the same point, that given time, people can come to understand each other. But how is she going to convince Eren when Armin couldn't? She can use herself as a shining example of how the most extreme people from each side can come to understand their former enemies, because she's lived this ideological transformation. That's how we ultimately beat Eren. We know that Zeke is merely the key to the activation of the Founder, and Eren has all the decision-making skills, so as long as Gabi can make this argument successfully, she can stop the Jägermaster plan. And following that, all Gabi and Eren need to do to achieve peace with Marley is to convince Magarth, who Eren already installed through Willy, to end the conflict. This is possible. Magarth is sympathetic to Eldians and is reasonable. They can do this. Magarth will become Helos, the man that saved Marley, by helping end the cycle of hatred through ceasing the attack. Gabi will be the one to instigate this monumental change, and hopefully the world will be at peace. It's also thematically fitting from a character standpoint. Since Gabi was introduced a few years ago, all anyone has said about her, the prevailing narrative about her, is that she's the female version of Eren. She's young, she's driven, and she's ignorantly hungry for revenge against an enemy that she sees as abhorrent and inhuman. This younger, purer version of Eren, who's still idealistic and hasn't been beaten down by the world like he has, can convince him that life is worth living and that peace is possible without the extinction of the Eldian race. If Gabi can find it in herself to forgive Eren for everything he's taken from her, including now Colt, she will be a bastion that forgiveness and healing is possible. I think ultimately the Jägermaster plan will fail because Eren will be convinced by Gabi to give the world another shot. That's how our story will end. Gabi is our savior and the only person that can carry Isayama's final message. And there we have it, episode 1 of Solving the Problems of Advancing Giants, the Jägermaster Plan. This video didn't go into full detail on how I think it'll all end because I'm going to do separate parts of this series on Paths, Ymir, and the final panel of the manga, and how I think this all feeds into one climax. In true Preston Jacobs fashion, I think I should say I'm probably wrong about half of this. I honestly don't have an answer for why Eren Cry laughed when Sasha died, and don't exactly know why he wanted to specifically know her last words. The Ymir girl is a massive mystery to me as well. These are just all things that I noticed in my reread, and ultimately I came to the conclusion that Gabi is our savior and Eren has given up on life. That does it for part 1 of Solving the Problems of Advancing Giants, and join me next time as we discuss what Annie is really up to. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the 2 biggest things you can do are subscribe so I can inch closer to the 1,000 subscriber mark and start monetizing these videos, and share them so people can poke holes in the theory and have fun with it. Besides that, I think likes help for stuff also. For further content to look forward to on this channel, I'll be doing a live chapter reaction when the next chapter comes out. It's going to be chapter 120, and milestone chapters are usually big ones, so stick around for that. Also stick around for further incarnations of this series, and also Rockin' Revy Part 4 will be out soon too. I'm always working on that in the background. Monetarily, if you want to support, you can make single donations with the Streamlabs link, and my Patreon is also linked in the description. If people pledge and say they want a video quicker, it's great motivation and ups the stakes a little bit from my side of things. Follow me on Twitter if you want updates or to tell me something about a theory you had, or about a hole in my theory. If you don't want to go to Twitter, just post your thoughts in the comments section. I'll read all the comments and probably respond to most of them. With that, I leave you screaming that Gabi is our savior and saying thanks. Treat this as a little post-credit scene of the video, since as I'm writing this, I've already edited half of the video, but I had an epiphany of another winning possibility, and if this one comes true, I also want predictions points for this. Now, importantly, this isn't part of the Jägermaster plan, but I think it's a golden idea and I wanted to share it. The way they remove the Titan threat entirely, with the tools and plot devices we are aware of currently, is someone like Eren collects all 9 Titans into one body, and then feeds himself to Historia or someone else of royal blood, therefore putting all 9 Titans under the founding Titans' vow of peace. The person who holds the Titans, as long as they have royal blood, would be constrained by Karl Fritz to never ever use the Titan powers for war or subjugation ever again. The cycle would end and ultimately the conflict would end. If Historia does name her child Ymir after her ex-lover and symbolically after the original Ymir, maybe her child would be the perfect vessel for this experiment. 2,000 years later, Ymir would have all 9 Titans within her again. To you, 2,000 years in the future.